Alrighty. Let's see if we can get this to do a thing. I am Chris from Airwindows, and I'm going to see whether I can't do a stream on a different topic this time. Here, let me make sure I can see what I'm doing. So I've done a lot of coding streams, and I'll continue to do them, but I've gotten myself kind of ahead of the game. So for today, I'm thinking this coming Sunday, I can set you up with either Pressure 5, Monitoring 2, or Clip Only 2. And when more people are in the chat, I will ask which of those you would want to prefer. Hey Lorenzo, hey Jazz. But what we're doing today is something I've been needing to do for a long time, and that is working on some drum samples. Because that's the thing, is I've been trying to get this together for Bespoke. I've already got out a large number of acoustic drum samples, and I wanted my electronic kicks in there. So I have done a bunch of DFAM kicks. I've done the basic Blue Lantern Asteroid, and I have one thing left to do before I'm ready to run with those and post everything. You know, put them into downloads and point you to them and say, have at it. And that is, and you'll forgive me while I fuss with all of the details here, because, yeah. These are kick drum samples, and I believe if I set it up just right, you can hear them. And I thought I would take this collection and boil it down to the A through Z selection that I'm going to make available, and then edit them down, do the fine-tuning on them, and run with that. So I was thinking we'll do that, and if that's too boring, then you don't need to stick around. It's something that I needed to do, and so we're kind of going to do it. Just as soon as I figure out what I'm doing with, stream's current bitrate is lower than the recommended bitrate. As soon as I figure out what I'm doing with this, because it's a new one on me, I'll tell you that. First things first, I believe I have, yep, this says Bespoke. What that means is it's showing the side of the screen, and I'm including my chat by having it be just literally showing on the screen. And then if I go to Twisted Wave and scooch this around, or maybe go to this and then go to Twisted Wave, I can work on these complete with whatever warnings it has for me. And even see, scroll up to see how many people are here. That just lies anyhow. I know there's like 3 of you posting, so concurrent viewers is not useful. And I was thinking just maybe I'll also be able to grab my bass and demonstrate some of the stuff that I'm doing and how I'm doing this. Turning on a little switch there. And I'll just kind of leave this on. So if I put this on, here is my little Fender Mustang, and I'm using a stereo output jack into 2 wires, and the wire where the, hang on, here, let me show you a little bit more before I go over to what I'm doing. So hi, I'm back. This is my little Fender Mustang, and that's a Artec mudbucker where I flipped around the coil so it's properly hum canceling, and a sort of jazz bass style pickup. which is stock to the Fender Mustang of this variety. And it's a stereo jack with the mudbucker going into a line input on the back of this little Vox amp that I have. This is a little Vox battery amp. And then the J-bass pickup is going into the actual amp. And as you can hear, I can make sounds with it. And you're not seeing it because I don't have a camera set up for any of that crap. But what I can do is, firstly, go back to all of this, then go back to first Chromium so that I can kind of see what's going on, and then Twisted Wave. These are all the kick drum samples I've recorded. It's more than 30 minutes of just this. So I have to pick 26 kicks out of all of this in order to do what I'm fixing to do. Here, we'll make that a little bit smaller. I can zoom in on them. So the question becomes, how do I choose among these? This is kind of a lot of stuff. And I'll show you how, because I've done this for like 5 other collections so far. This is the last one. This was the largest one because it's 30 minutes of just this. Where there's another area. Here's another area. Here's another area. And what I can do is select a little bit of it. And that's essentially how I'm going to be doing it. It's kind of neat to me that at the moment I don't have to care where the camera is because I'm wearing the microphone by which you're hearing all of this. And the microphone's able to hear the kick and this bass, which is an amplifier elsewhere in the room. So let's get going, I guess. Because as you can see, there's kind of a lot here. So we're going to call that an alternate kick, right? Now I'll tell you, the way this happens, how all this was made to happen, including noises like this, which are not especially useful, is I just fired up my synthesizers, and this is the sound of a Blue Lantern Asteroid mini synth with a bunch of extra stuff going on. And it's more easily seen like in a weirder place like here. Kind of get a bit of a sense of it here. So what's happening to make this waveform? And why would I want to make this waveform? Well, your regular synthetic kick, pardon my chair, I kind of need to get a new chair, but I got a bunch of priorities going on. This is not necessarily the biggest one. Your regular kick might look kind of like this. This is one of the ones that I created earlier. It's a regular Blue Lantern asteroid kick, and the slight irregularities are because it's an analog device that I set up to do this. This is a kick that sounds like this. And as you can see, that's very round. And a Blue Lantern asteroid kick is a trigger and an initial hit, an initial click noise, that's activating, I think it's probably a twin T circuit. It's a resonant circuit that resonates down in the bass, and you dial it in such a way where it's making an oscillation that fades away. Since it's an analog circuit, it is not a phase linear oscillation where it builds up to the peak and then fades off again. It's strictly one directional, so it's acting like a drum, which of course that's the idea. And if you make it louder, for instance, you can see that what this one does is it's a sharper attack, and it's clipping, and it's also slowing its decay as it goes. So it's going down in frequency. These are more closely spaced, and then and that one sounds like this. You can turn it up just a little bit, make sure you can hear it. I may be clipping, so we got that going on. But as you can see, the stuff in this Asteroid mini synth is a lot weirder. And I'll tell you why. What I'm doing when I use this is the Asteroid mini synth is kind of more of a triangle wave generator, but you can add a boost to round off the triangle wave and make it act a little bit more like a resonant thing. And then it's got all of these knobs and all of these jacks, like so many things you can do with it. It's really a strange noisemaker more than a drum synthesizer. It's about the size of 2 mini shimmeries. It's many times the size of a normal kick drum maker. And among the inputs there's an input that says lin, and that is linear FM. Meaning you can modulate the frequency of the waveform that it's making through running something else into it. What else might you run into it? How about another kick drum? So I'm using the Asteroid bass drum that you heard just now to pitch modulate the Asteroid mini synth. And then it's also got a input. You can have also a multiple FM inputs. So we can modulate the pitch of everything, but you can also run in a mix input and just run another module into it and mix it in. And for that, I'm using a mini shimmery, which is like a hi-hat kind of module. And the hi-hat module is what's making this little chiff, this noise up here, that's very high pitched, as you can hear. The attack of this is starting out very bright and real brief, and then it's extending out, and you'll notice that the spacing between these waveforms is real screwed up, and that's because that FM synth is in there. The frequency modulation is affecting it very strongly. And the boost is engaged, so it's also very loud and distorted. And we have some spaces in here that are going to be low frequency. I'm not sure exactly how many samples that is, but this is a bassy hit, and it is early on in the waveform. And this is all in the front of the waveform. It's all very loud, although it's getting modulated by another low frequency motion that's happening. So it's just there's a lot going on here. And as we shrink it down, you see that the tail end of it, it softens up, but because of the frequency modulation, it's still kind of weird. There's stuff going on here, and it kind of wants to be a triangle wave more than a sine wave. So when we combine all of those things together, we get a super aggressive, bright attack kick with a complicated decay. So instead of just going boom, it does something like this. Now, one side effect of this, especially early on here in this first 10 minutes or so, I think my decay is excessively long. What I was working with in the other one suggested that this was maybe more decay than I need. Although you can pick out stuff here that's good and useful, and then part of the process of making the samples is trimming them so that they, go back to silence, and then putting tiny little fades on the very end of it so that it will take any background noise. Like I was getting background noise off of my Moog Dayfam, possibly because of stuff that I was wiring into it. And I used my little here, let me load up one of those. Twisted Wave open, and it won't be open recent, but it'll be like minimal kicks. Here's some minimal kicks. Actually, let's open them all up and I'll show you what I did. And then we'll close this once I'm done. So this is all of the minimal kicks I made. And they're all DFAM generated. And because they are so tightly packed here, if I put a little silence in there, if I put a little space in, I can get slower tempos, but I will be able to at least show you what some of these are like just by isolating them like this, and then so we set something like that up and we start hearing what the kick actually feels like, including where that initial hit was. And we can see, looking at these, first of all, they all fade out to silence. There was sometimes noise on some of these, especially the softer ones, and the cutting off to silence helps minimize that. But this is also a case where I'm using the DFAM's FM capabilities, so that some of them are like this, they're just plain. But the one right to the side of it is, as you can see, a lot more complicated. That waveform is not a simple sine wave looking thing. And so when we fire it up, it too is fading away pretty fast, but it's not going to feel the same at all. And I'm starting to get questions. I can see live chat more easily this time because of the way that I'm doing this. And so can you, because rather than hosting it in OBS, I'm just showing bits of Chrome. I can let you have monitoring 2 next week. What we're doing today is samples, because I need to get them done. And I have a little backlog, so I can pick one of the things out of the backlog. I'll give you a choice between monitoring 2, which uses dark instead of not just another dither, and uses the new denormalization, or clip only 2, which is the latest version of clip only, or pressure 5, which is the latest pressure that you saw it in my video. And that also includes a clip only stage. In the end of it is a sort of after booster, and I'm using it as a sort of final output. So you can indeed have a updated monitoring with slightly different handling of denormalization noise and dark instead of not just another dither. Those at this time are the only changes to monitoring 2. But it can come out if you want. You'll probably see a goodly number of things on GitHub that are not quite out yet. Among those, the things I've just mentioned. But yeah, our deal here is that we're going to make kick drums that work as kick drums. And we can see about how short they are, about how quickly they go by, with some exceptions. Like if I go all the way to the end of the minimal kicks, I think I have a longer one. That's got a bit more rumble. But these are all minimal. These are designed to sit in very quiet techno mixes. But another thing that I could do is, I think DFAM kicks will open all of these, and these contain some of the longer ones. This is also an example of that filtering that I said. As far as plugin for lo-fi sound, you could try iron oxide. That's a tape effect kind of thing. Bit crushers like Bit Glitter or D-Res, a variation on D-Res. Basically try stuff. So these are longer. Like this is super long, this one here. And you can see that that is like practically a second in length. And one of the things I had to do with this was sample it, and it was even a little more sustained than that, and then use the editing and use crossfades on it. Oh, just lost it. Here's all of our kicks again. You see all these variations that are what the DFAM was able to make. And these are all selected out of enormous piles of samples, much like the previous one. And the way this is done is I would start at this point, have all this, and then go to silence and select fade out, at which point it would make this part go quieter a little faster. And we're going to save that, or we're going to not save that because I don't need to. That's what we're going to be doing here. Except for we have a lot of stuff to work through, because as you can see, here, let me demonstrate the basic process. If I was to copy that, or it'll be cutting it really, make a new file and paste that in there, I can start pasting these things in, and then I can start working with them. And if I wanted to try to make something out of this, I might firstly shorten it. And then if I liked the way that this attack went, but I didn't like the amount of sustain on it, I'd decide where should it start to cut off, because that's really sustaining. So I might start as early as here and do a quick fade that's shift and greater than, makes sort of the shape of a fade. And that's where that fade goes, but I could do it again, or I could reselect it to in here and do it again, and then in here and do it some more. until it's really cutting off, at which point I've got this. And the sustain is a lot different, which is different from if you were going just from the very beginning and doing that a lot, at which point you'd lose the whole 200, 300 millisecond area. It becomes much quieter there. And that's how we shape the contour of these from a starting position like this. So the idea here, and I'm gonna keep the bass on me because one of the things I was learning with all the other ones is that some of the kicks work better for like finger playing, or indeed I use my thumb. Or I can use my fingernails. Or I can use the same fingernail but with a downstroke like it was a pick. Or up and down strokes like it was a pick. Or use my thumb to thwack down on the string. And all of these make different sounds that merge with different kinds of bass notes and merge with different kinds of kick drums, or the bass notes will merge with different kind of kick drums. Thing is, if you take something like this, I might be exploring how that works and think like, well, that's really nasty. What about the one right next to it? You'd think it would be very much the same because you play them right through and they're like, these are all the same. But listen attentively to what this does. It's got a bit of a different voice. And then the one next to it, if you listen to it isolated without going just through them, you start to pick out the details. That's a lower pitched one. That's a higher pitched one, and I can see there's a lot of brightness on this. So if I was to play bass along with this, it might be with slapping with my thumb. Actually have to turn it down a little because these are so loud. But all the same, this is not the prettiest sounding kick. There's not a lot of weight to it. We've got some irregularity in here, making it be more interesting. It's more mid-rangey. But the sort of tail, the way that it drops down, is kind of bland. Electronic kicks normally drop down much more sharply than that. This is going, yeah, 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 yeah. And then the attack is kind of all messy here. This is a big chuff of noise. And it's being overlaid onto the existing waveform. That is that Blue Lantern mini shimmery here causing this to happen. And it starts out loud. It's filling up a lot of space, and then it dies away rather quickly. So this little window is where it's peeking through the rest of the waveform. And then this is where it's starting to fade off. And by the time we get to be a little later, here's a little more of it, here's a little more. It's just kind of peeking through here. But that's sort of sputtery. Like the way this is showing up is not of the most useful. And we can kind of hear it in the roughness of that sound. It's very gritty. Whereas if we find one that's a little bit cleaner, and I have no idea what that would be, I could listen for them. Like, I'm not sure I like that honk. Here's an interesting example. Here's one that has an unpleasant honk. Kind of nasal. But this one has the FM synthesis going, and it's doing something very different. It's doing kind of a scrambled sound. It sounds a little bit more like an actual kick drum, but the ones that were sounding better were kind of more over here. And there's one that sort of shakes. And this one sounds fairly decent. And there's more of that nasal honk again. So if I zoomed in on this, one of the things we find is that it's got a little more sound scattered around through it. Like, we've got this low frequency stuff that's all scrambled up. These are not the same length waveform. It's starting out fairly fast, introducing lower frequency waves rather quickly, and going into this much lower frequency thing. And the overtones, the chiff sound, is peeking through here in these little spikes, so it's keeping on happening. And here on the edges of this waveform, and here, and then we have a whole little picture of it coming down here before it clips again. And then a little picture of it sneaking up here. It's fading away fairly quickly, but there's enough of it in the beginning of this that it's not too choppy. And it fades away to, this is the shape of a raw clipping with an output capacitor on the circuit. So this is the biggest low frequency stuff we can get. This is normal for analog circuits. And you can see that it's fading off to a sort of roundish shape, but not really, because there's this triangular behavior as well. And it's kind of irregular, like these, none of these look quite the same. And that's part of what gives us a sound that feels like an actual kick. And there's a lot of space to work with here, because, oh, got the wrong bit here. If I select this, I can make it go faster. So that's a big heavy kick, and we can probably start with that, and then we'll keep scanning through, because it's been about 45 minutes. Well, I didn't start on time, but it's been a goodly number of minutes of just explaining what I'm going to be doing here. So I probably need to start scampering along and actually making these. Again, I'm seeking 26 out of this 30-minute slice of just all the kick sounds you could possibly imagine. So I'm going to be analyzing what I'm getting and sort of playing through and listening for stuff that sounds like it's interesting. And we'll start with this one, just to demonstrate how this is done. I'm going to cut so that I don't select it twice. New file, paste, and now this is where all of my end result ones are going to go. And we'll just keep adding them here. Now let's zoom all the way to the beginning here. Hit play. So I'm not entirely thrilled with some of this stuff because it's this shaker-like noise. Oh, well, hang on, that was interesting though. What was that? Oh, that might have gotten past me. Let's start over. One of them sounded different. I'm curious. This one maybe? And I think I know what sounded different about this to me. Yep, we have this attack. This is enough that I'll run with it and see whether I get anything out of it. See what this is doing? There's this chiff on it, and the very initial wave is essentially a huge bass wave. This is a super low frequency here. And it's clipping. It's doing the amount of low frequency here after bouncing to the other direction, taking up the full range of the waveform. And then it's clipping out of that stuff and then bringing it back in very quietly here. And then it's almost immediately over to a normal style decay. So this is like the idea of, my kick drum has an attack shaped like this. You've got the high frequency stuff overlaid on this low frequency stuff. That's something that's a little bit special and that you don't always get out of like electronic kicks, because they don't necessarily have this chiff noise. That's coming from the Blue Lantern Mini Shimmery. So we'll grab that one. That turned out to be an interesting little setup. And we'll paste it in here. And we'll continue. Because we don't really like how long that sustains. Or was that the one? It still sounds like, yeah, this is a similar behavior. I'm not as happy with it, and I can see why, because it's not maintaining the sound. It's like a little bit, barely any on the initial hit, and then there's more on this part, and then there's more on this part, and then there's a little over here, and it's just scattering that high frequency chiff through all of this stuff. Interesting, but we're not really onto anything useful this early. I was just beginning to sample. However, get a load of this. This might be something. Oh yeah, see? So it's cleaner towards the end of the wave. Well, yeah, but if I drew my kick, would I be able to get all of this stuff? Like, I am drawing it, but I'm drawing it by plugging stuff into each other. This initial hit is very brief. And then here's a big pile of waveform with some spikes in here anyhow to sort of mix it up. And then this is a big old chiff that kind of goes right away, and that makes it brief. So it's not continuing onwards. Instead, it's getting out of the way rather quickly, and that makes this a desirable kick to fool with. So I'll speed it up. What I'm feeling there is that that kick has a attack that is practically behind the bass onslaught, and that makes it have useful qualities. So we're going to throw that in there as well. And then look at some of these other guys. Like, we're still very early on. So I'm going to be more willing to throw as many of these away as possible because I got a lot to work through. But you heard how that one was weird and kind of garbled? That's kind of like the rumble of a real bass drum that's not making a perfect note. All of these are kind of sustained too long, although I can trim them in editing, make them die away a little faster. But to have the sustaining part of the kick drum sound hanging around for like 150 milliseconds is too long. It'll make things drag. It'll make the groove drag. But what this does do is this has that initial snap very clearly, and then it has an unusual decay. The decay is not making a note. And what that means is if I was tighten it up a little bit so that I can jam along to it. It's kind of trying to make a note. I'm going to say that I can always throw it away later if I don't like it. That could be interesting enough to use. We'll see. I may have to go through these later because I might not be able to do this in the 2 hours I intend to spend. But this just shows you what it's like doing this kind of stuff, where you're fixing to do a big pile of drum samples and you know how to edit them, and so you make stuff like this, and this is how that works out. Another garbled. Oh, that had an interesting tail end. Thing is, that sounds like a bass string, a note of some kind. And usually that's less useful. In fact, I'm going to call it less useful for this one. I did some stuff with the DFAM where I made sounds that acted like notes and acted like effects. They were distinguishable sounds. But with this, I've got so much noise in here, I am going to try to not lean in that. Nice little click. That was a pretty good rumble. They're starting to get tighter. I am reducing the decay. But it's still kind of really long. You'll also notice that these are sustaining quite a bit rather than just dying away like a normal decay. And part of that is because of the amount of distortion in here. These modules are good at distorting things and making your like gabber kicks and so on. Really aggressive stuff. So let's see where we get with this. I'm not interested in having them all sound just like this, so I'm waiting to hear something else happen. That might count. I feel like the rumble is a little bit too... Yeah, like we got this. Hey, Rose. So the sustain on this, the rumble on this is not bad. It's not that bassy though. Like the rumble in this is all up in the mid-range. And that does mean you'll be able to hear it, but since it's 125 milliseconds after the attack, that's not actually useful. Whereas if we did this one, okay, now that has my attention. The attack on that one is real clicky. And Bro was talking about how to balance bass and kick and mixing, and people will talk about like, okay, how do you not have them blend together so that you can hear them separately? No, my sweet summer child, you don't necessarily want to do that. Listen to what happens when I take this and I play a bass part over it that's making a sound that matches the sound of the kick. Because if I played with my thumb, or if I played with like my finger down onto the string, clicking it against the fretboard, and the sort of the growl of that kind of also goes with this particular kick sound. Maybe not the best possible example, but I might be able to make it better by slowing this up a little bit. So that, bro, is making them blend. You don't necessarily balance bass and kick by making them all sit in their own little places, although that is a Ted Templeman trick, where he did that on Van Halen and Doobie Brothers records. He EQ'd the kick so that there was a spot for the bass to sit in so that they did not combine. But you can also have them combine. And I think that was a good enough example that I'm willing to take that and move onwards with it in case it's one of the ones I keep. Again, I'm going to be making more than 26 of them in this list down here, and then see at some later point about editing them down. But let's go through them now. Too much sustain. Listen to that. Listen to how it's... getting in the way of the bass. And it's really slow. It's like, yong, yong, yong. So we probably got a goodly number of these in here that I'm just going to skip straight through because they're all variations on this overly sustainy stuff. Like the action that I was getting out of the minimal kicks. Let's open one of those just to see. Or here, I've got odd kicks, but these are not necessarily like that sustains a little bit. There's more attack and less of this just relentless sustain going on. They die away more quickly. Whereas something like this, that's barely a kick. That's like a bass note, except for that it's a noteless bass note. So this area here, oh God, I have a snare without expecting it. That's actually not a good idea. I think I was just playing with one of the knobs, and that's the noise knob. It's cool, but if you want synthetic snares, I've been working on those too, and that's also in the stuff that I'll be including. So let's just open up this pile. DFAM snares. So we can do synthetic snares, but that one was just kind of garbage. And of course, a lot of these feel like rim shots. Or even quicker, these feel like blips. That's very rim shot-like, but it is purely Moog DFM is completely synthetic. So yeah, you will have those as well. I've already got these ones finished, including the long ones like this. And we will not be including, because it's just a kind of big pile of garbage. Though it's, I grant you it's kind of cool, but still. So all this stuff is kind of sustaining too long. And that is purely a bass note. Except for it's like a bass note that's fret buzzing. So we're going to try to avoid stuff like this, or this, because it's stretching out so long. These are not useful kick drums to have for like anything with rhythm to it. Even if they're doing interesting things, like this is a fairly interesting decay. The pitch of it is kind of dropping down, but it's taking too long. It's just too slow. Although granted, you could take this and then pitch it up. But what we're going to do is get past some of these. How many of them are just like that? Well, that was kind of interesting sounding, that just one. What does this look like and act like? I'm having the string buzz in my thumb. What's the attack on this look like? Okay, that's pretty weird. I can see why it got my attention a little bit. What we've got here is this sort of mid-rangey chef with a certain amount of low frequency stuff. It's being broken up like mad. And then there is a low frequency whumph with a high frequency tail on it at the same time. So the whole sound is just breaking up weirdly and doing strange things. The low frequency bursts are in different places. Like that's on the top, that's on the bottom, that's on the top again. And the whole thing is just chopped up. This is the kind of stuff you get with frequency modulation. It's just making the spaces be spaced out really weirdly. And so we've got like up, down with a spike in the middle of it, and then up with the spike in the middle of it. And we're kind of throwing a lot of super low frequency energy into this, and that's why it sounds like this. There's a lot of thunderousness to this guy, and that really obnoxious aggressive attack. Because one of the things you can also get is if your low frequencies hit earlier than your high frequencies, it kind of blends together in an interesting way. You don't necessarily want to hit with your high frequencies immediately and then have the low frequencies all come around later. It's better if everything kind of hits as a solid, like sonic lump. And we will take this on the back of that observation just in case it proves handy, and then move on our merry way as far as trying to find more. That might not be useful though, because this is all in the middle of a bunch of very clicky, obnoxious sounding stuff with all this sustain. It's really too much sustain, even when it does things like this. That was a real kind of clanking a plastic object thing in there. But it's almost like, you know, a shaker or one of those sandpaper things, a kabasa. So this whole area is proving unuseful. Even when it's including bassy stuff, it's kind of garbling. Here's one of your laser zaps. You hear that? Here it is again. So these guys are all very similar sounding. Oh, there was another laser zap. That looks a little more solid. I think the pitch is going to go up here. Oh, that was interesting. What do we got? An obnoxious bass note. And sure enough, that is the pitch going up. It went darker because for this stuff down here, like that kick, which would be a strange special effects kick, again, this is all coming out of 3 different Blue Lantern modules hooked together. Whereas we get up here, that's darker because it's going to higher frequencies. And we can literally see them as we look at the waveform. We go up here, we've still got much of the same stuff going on, including the chiff at the beginning, highs at the beginning. The frequency starts to get more spaced out. It's going down in pitch, but it's getting modulated by a bunch of other stuff. And there's a lot of highs in here as well. And then it drops to the point where we're getting these big square wavy looking things. See, the reason this area is not proving very beneficial is because a lot of this is so heavily distorted that we're just sustaining it forever. We need the initial hit to be in this area and then kind of dropping away and cleaning up a lot by the time it gets to the tail here. Otherwise, we just get this. And that's far too much sustain in the middle of the attack. This is not a pulse as we would understand it. This is a note. This is like a synthesizer note. And you could like repitch it and so on and use it as a sampler note, but what we're looking for is stuff that actually acts like kick drums. And that's not one. But we are starting to get interestingier sounds. That's more an obnoxious sound, but we'll keep on looking. I think we're in a zone where we're just going to make this funny honk noise for a while. And we're clearly not turning down the decay anytime soon. We're all about going like, okay, what if the kick drum sustained for about half a second? Which turns out to be unuseful. But I was doing this while tracking it because I was focusing on something else, I guess. So these all feel very similar. There we're starting to sustain less. So now we're going to listen for, I'll even turn it up just a bit. Not that much. So we're sustaining less, but I have been not very excited about the attacks of any of these up to this one, which maybe is better. So that's a very distracting kick. It's got a lot of personality, it's got an enormous amount of energy, and it's going to kind of dominate anything that it's in. And the reason is the regularity of the way it's dropping and the way that it's building its waveform out of this strongly asymmetrical, like there's a heavy thump here. It starts with low, then high, and then low again, and all of this is just low frequency. This is extending for such a long time that it's not acting like a note. So in theory, we have a amount of low frequency pressure here, but it would need to be cleaner. We've got so many of these little intermediate guys here that are high frequencies that it's getting in the way of it being able to put low frequencies early. And then even as it fades away, we've got so much frequency modulation going on that we're not getting much of a sense of a note in here anywhere. It's like a noise that's dropping down in pitch as it goes. And it's all mid-rangey and stuff. So I'm gonna say no to that one. And the many near it, which are just like it. But we're going to keep searching because there's a half an hour of this to go through, all at 24-bit 96K. And hey, we just had a bass drop here. This one was suddenly bassy, and this one was not. So that's not bassy, but this is. Like how much it's a note. One thing I am able to do with this though is play with fingerstyle, even though it's very bright and attacky. Because what it's doing, and I can see what it's doing in this waveform here. See this? Low, 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 high, low, high, kind of medium high, low, medium low, high. We have a kind of weird sine wave made out of this shape being generated, and then you can follow the line here, and our ears can kind of follow this line as well, even though it's overlaid on something else. And as a result, it feels like there's low frequency waveforms here, because this other stuff interfering with it is not distracting from that much. We can literally see where the additional stuff enters in. And it's not all wildly distorted, lots of it kind of is, but this might be something that I could grab and make use of. And we compare it with the other stuff nearby, and it's not doing anything of the sort. But this one, maybe not great, but possibly something that could be used. So we'll throw that in there and move right along. So what I'd like is for the low frequency to not converge on a note and just honk the note. I would like it to drop, and drop at a specific rate too. But I also want other stuff happening to distract from it and make it be more complicated, because I've already got ones that do just a sine wave dropping. So that's a punchy kick. Too bad it's kind of slow. And we can see why it's punchy. It's heavily distorted, and almost everything is just total distort. So we're not getting what we need as far as impact. We're stretching it out enormously. This is not showing on by samples. So this part is far too long. But you'll see that rather than being all mixed up, it's acting like a wave. And so we're getting a note out of it rather than just a grungy mess. So what I'm going to do is, see, that's more of the grungy mess. And this is a note. And I'd like to pick one of these as a good rock kick, but I think this low and this sustained is not good. It's very deep, kind of hissy. And that amount of sustain is just going to be distracting. It's not doing very useful things there. Whereas some of these, like this, are too high-pitched. So maybe oh, that might be a nice dividing line. Like this is too low. But that has just enough rumble in it that it's a really beefy, like you said, rock kick. That's too slow. That's too slow of a tempo. I'll tighten it up a little bit. So that's about as beefy as I've ever heard. We'll grab this and throw it in the bin and move on, because having a bunch of them like that I don't think is going to be helpful. But we might as well have that one. Now let's see whether we got anything else, because now we're starting to get into the zone. And as expected, these are all going to be variations on the pitch of this particular thing. We've taken out that FM modulation for the most part. I think I still hear it coming back. Like I think I hear it coming back in this. Yeah, it's a little less regular. That was a fairly nice attack. That felt like a nice sort of whack. Let's just randomly grab that because I thought it sounded cool and quickly move on. You know, soon enough we'll have more than 26 kicks down here, at which point it'll become moving on. I see variation here. These don't look quite the same as the others, so there's something new happening. And I think it's more high frequency content. I think I have the mini shimmery making that attack noise, but I've got it much briefer than before. So rather than going shuk, shuk, it's going kick. What did I have here? I'm going to call that another acceptable kick to keep and maybe work with. We'll go from there. Oh wow, that's very distorted. Okay, maybe a metal kick? that's not proper double kick. To do proper double kick, we got to go like this. Yeah, we're going to call this our first ultra aggressive metal kick. Now, why did we like that? That sounded kind of cool. What's going on in this waveform that made it be cool? It looks like we've got mostly a decay that has an interesting quality of it's rounder on the bottom and then it's rounder on the top here, so that's interesting. We've got this edge, which is continuing fairly regularly, so it's making a note-like thing. And then here in the attack, we've got a real chuff of high frequency, first at ultra high frequency beginning. And when I say ultra high frequency, I mean this. And then we have a mid-range part of the beginning. And then we have a more low frequency area. This is how this kind of stuff is constructed. This is how you get that sort of thing. And we have what looks a little bit like, you know, up here putting in low frequency energy, or at least a kind of frequency. Then down here for some brightness, and then up here again and more of that highs, combining it to sound kind of like this. So that's the mid-range of our attack. It's a grungy, nasty MIDI kind of quality with highs in there as well. And as it extends, we get this area, which leads into our first low frequency area. And that's also got some highs on the tail end here. If we include that very beginning stuff, that's metallic as all hell. That sounds super metal-y. And if we extend it outwards to include the low frequencies being shown here, there you have it. It was so loud I had to turn it down to even have you be able to hear it. And that's not peak either. Peak is around here. This is the hottest it'll go. We're going to call that a metal-y kind of kick, and it sounds like this in total. And that'll come in handy. For who, I don't know, but I think it'll come in handy. Notice the way that all the different kinds of sound combine with each other. It's not necessarily a simple process. Like a few extra little waveforms here and there will make a big change in how this works. So, boop. Paste that sucker in there. And this is the one just after it that we didn't choose. Sort of a low frequency rumble. These have a tendency of making an unpleasant honk. Yeah, it's a metal double kick. No question about it. Or techno style, metal style, because you could do a techno track and just throw in a thing where suddenly it was vibing like metal, except for that it was, you do whatever you want with it. And we're getting into the too much sustain zone again. So these are not going to be helpful. It was already too much sustain earlier, and this has just stretched it out even longer. But I think I know what's happening is I'm trying to find the right setting for the FM to bring in that kind of rumble rather than having it be just a note. And I'm stretching out the sustain to be able to hear that more clearly. So let's look at this one in the middle, though we're not necessarily going to use it, but because that sounds like low frequencies dropping downward. And why does it sound like that? Well, for one thing, we're not distorting as hard. So the reason it sounds like low frequencies is it's not all made up of distorted stuff. And we can see that we don't have all that much clipping and it cleans up. But the other thing that we can see it's fairly even, but I don't think that's really perfectly even. And early on, looking at where these waveforms are, I see an irregularity. This is low frequency, it's more space, and then it's tightening up. But see, we've got a tighter area and then a looser area, and then a tighter area and then a looser area, and a looser area. The reason this was feeling like a drum rather than a obnoxious note is because it's breaking up the frequencies as it's doing this. This is still all in the distorted attack part. But the way that it drops into that bassy region, there's an irregularity that can be plainly seen. I can zoom in on it and you can even see from the darkness of the areas on the screen that the spacing of these waveforms is kind of all scrambled up. There's never quite enough to focus in any one sound, and that's why it sounds like a percussive attack rather than the onset of a simple note. And it by itself sounds like this. And on the back of it taking my attention this way, I'm going to throw it in my pile too. But we're not going to take most of these. They are just too sustaining, even when they do amusing things like this. Boom, boom. This sort of throbbing noise in there. Excuse me. And these are now louder. I must have adjusted something. Hang on, I'm gonna grab a little water. Now there's a thundery noise that sounds like it's in the tail end. Doesn't sound like exactly one note. And the reason for that is we can see the sort of irregularity here. And we can kind of see that these waveforms are not perfectly even back here either. So the sustain of it is still getting some modulation. There's a lower frequency modulation in here. And it wasn't good enough that I'm going to keep, but it made it not be just a note. Whereas this is much more like just a note. Compared to more like a kind of timpani, that rumble. A lot of these, not so useful. They're just sustaining too long. Whether they're high or low, the sheer amount of sustain on this and the amount of distortion that's causing the entire front end of the thing to be going for a really extended period, that's okay for that metal kick. But for a lot of these, not so much. So we're going to skip through more rapidly, I think. The stuff I'm varying at this point in the recording session is not doing it for me. So I'm clearly exploring and trying to find what to change to make it work better, and I have not hit upon decay time yet, or toning down the loudness of it all. Speak of the devil. There's decay time right there. Instantly it became quicker. So will one of these be useful? This is a click. This was something similar. It's a higher pitch click. And this feels like a click with a bit of reverb on it somehow. So that feels more like a note somehow. I don't like it as much. This feels a little bit like a zwip, like a downward pitch thing. And that actually has my attention. What about this sounds good to me? Something in here sounds useful. Let's have a quick look. So what's going on? Well, I'll tell you one thing that's going on. It hits with this little snap, and there's a lot of highs. You can see from the darkness of the shading here that these are closer together than these and these. So this part's going down in pitch, but we also have high clipped, low clipped, high clipped, sort of medium and high again, and then over to just low and high waveform that continues and then gradually becomes smoother and fades off. So what's going on here? We have this bright stuff, but it's also interspersed with a larger waveform that's just full clipped, and it's going from one extreme to the other to back again, and that's making it carry energy that's acting like it's low frequency energy, because we're pushing low frequencies here and then we're pushing the inverse low frequencies here this far away. And if we were to make that into a waveform by going, okay, this is a cycle of a waveform now. Here's the top, here's the bottom, and this inner chuff stuff is just kind of there. The note that it would be is meh. So maybe not that low of a frequency of a sound after all, but still, that combined with the really bright stuff, that's a good place for this to hit. So we're going to grab this and up, and I just done screwed up and selected too many things. I'm going to grab this because it's attacking at two different frequencies, and that's part of what makes it useful. That's super aggressive. This cake is savage. Let us copy it and paste it in. All the recent ones we've been doing are savage. Listen to this. When you listen to them through like that, you kind of don't hear as much of the aggression. But here's our crazy metal kick. And here's are even crazier. Very aggressive stuff. So we're going to go on. That's a honk. I don't like the honk. If it's playing an identifiable note with overtones, that's less useful. So let's see what we had here when it just stopped doing that. That feels like a spread out attack somehow. That feels like a tighter attack somehow. So if I isolated just this guy, what would I get? See, what I'm finding with playing this one is that I am plucking the string more than using my thumb or slapping it, making this sound, which is a scrapey noise followed by a plunk. And that's how it's blending in with that kick. So when we add the kick to it, so let's see why it made me think that. This kick has a secret. It's starting off with very bright, distorted stuff that is not regular. Here's a little short waveform, and then a longer waveform, and then speeding up again, and then a big low frequency hit, and then medium, and then more low frequency hit. It's very irregular. It's not making an attack that sounds like a note. But then in the middle of it, we've got this faint hint of noise, which is coming from something else and is not showing up in most of this. It's just being used to manipulate how the rest of it is going. So what we've got is 4 little bits of noise in the middle of the attack just as it switches over. So there's a mid-range attack, and then just as it transitions over to being a lower note, we've got this little psst of 4 little bits of high frequency stuff, very faintly heard. And then it rounds off and goes away. And the end result is this sound. Much like if you heard the sound of the finger going onto the string and then it scraped off the string, and those little high frequency noises are merging with the scraping off of the string, and the initial part of it is the finger contacting the string at first. So it blends together the 2 different kinds of instrument, the bass and the kick drum. You can kind of hear it. That's good enough to keep. So we'll grab this one out of there and paste it in. Since it's not a crazy metal kick, I'm going to paste it in more towards the middle. And kind of shoot for mellow up front and then the more psychotic ones toward the end. and we'll see where we get with that, because we have many more to go, even though I might only be going for another half an hour or so. Oh, and that's the one that I'm keeping. This is the one that I'm working from. And these guys are not sounding interesting. But I hear that FM coming back in. I hear the rumble like this, or this. Although it still is kind of note-like. I'm not hearing that much rumble. And there's far too much attack on here. Like if you look at one like this one, so much distortion. It's just this solid block of... And though that's kind of neat, it's kind of gabbery. That's filling up so much space, not with... the front edge of this is where the beat lives. This is no longer beat. This is just noise filling up space. And it's not producing an edge. And the way that the spacing of these is made, this high frequency stuff is scattered with the lower frequency stuff and just making a noise there. And we have one little touch of high frequency in there. But that's way after the attack. It needs to be kind of associated with this up here, and it's super not. So this is one of the reasons why this particular hit is not doing anything for me. It just does this. And I'm not interested. So, might be worth skipping ahead to where there is a bit less sustain on this, because these are distorting so hard. Well, that was kind of gnarly, though. But is it good enough to pay attention to? I don't think so. That's more of a note. Oh, we're starting to lose that click on the front. What's that look like? Oh yeah, this is kind of messy. You can see these areas that have more high frequencies, but they're all scattered throughout the thing. And that's not going to be so useful. So this whole area is kind of misadjusted. This is one way that you can set a pile of Blue Lantern kick drums all feeding into each other. Hello. That's that pitch drop that I've been talking about, where I don't want it to just be a note. That got my attention so much, I want to go and have a look at what we've got here. So our attack is focusing on up here, and then down, and then up, and then down a couple of times. And basically that means this waveform, the low frequencies in between these spikes, are like this, and then a higher, and then much lower to dropping to next to nothing. It just dropped away completely. And the result is like this. It's got a certain amount of character to it. We'll grab it. It got me to stop out of the editing process and go, hang on, what was that? That's a good sign. And we'll put it earlier on, because it's not a metal kick. It's not hyper, super, uber aggressive. And what's the kind of stuff around it? Fairly similar. So these sort of go honk. And that one was more colorful. That's got a sort of mid-range punch in the attack. Why? Because these wider spaces between the chiffs, that's up here, this is down here, this is up here, this is down here, and this is up here. We have a dropping frequency effect out of where those lived. And then we have a chiff on the end, we can see this little fuzz. But seeing as that's just kind of consistently showing up here, in fact, it's happening in like here, 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 here. It's following its own little waveform. So that might be why this felt like it had some points of interest. And it's more sustaining than I would like, but we can do things about that in post-processing. Let's grab that as well and put it in the same place. At which point these two similar ones are like this. Similar kicks, both kind of usable, but the attacks are faintly different. And the attacks are moving in different ways. So, onwards. We might start running into more useful ones because this is not as distorted as it was. Here's one of our not just a note, but it feels very blurry. Like there's a kind of wobbly quality to it. I don't like that as much. We're definitely focusing on a note. Hello. Now it's starting to sound like kick drums. That kind of chokes up. Whereas this one I think was more of a drop. That's aggressive. Okay, so these two feel about similar. I like this one better. We're going to stick you in the metal-y zone. It's a higher frequency one than some of the ones surrounding it. And moving on. More of those honking noises. I like the punchiness of this though. Yeah, kind of thundery heavy rock kind of thing. Almost AC/DC or whatever. Da-da-da. Yeah, the beefiness of that I will take. We're not going to put it all the way forwards into the metal zone because it's got that low-endy beefy quality. But that will come in, that will have its uses, I think. These are getting into much lower frequency things, and I believe they are getting quieter, meaning we'll have less distortion here. Still kind of sustainy though. I don't think that's better than the one that I just did. But what else have we got coming up? Something about the way that that one hit and dropped. That one feels like downstrokes. Let's find out why. We've got pretty much a straight frequency drop here, which is why it's not sounding as much like a note, and that's useful. And we've got a pretty clean attack that's not all just bright frizzy stuff on the front. It's basically jumping into being a square wave, but it's slower to kick in. Like, this is bright stuff, this is slightly rounded, and there's a little bit of detail on there. And then slightly rounded going into this clip, and then at this point it's just full meltdown. And then we've got a little detour here. It's lowering in pitch, more square waviness, rounding off, and then more little detours here. I think this is why that felt like a thing. Also, there is other irregularities here, and here, and there. And then that's a nice sort of trapezoidal, you know, there's an angle on that, even though it's slightly bumpy. And this is all in that initial attack part. And the end result is that where this one sounds like this, there's this kind of chunk to how that one hits that I think is going to be useful. I think all that stuff was up in the high frequencies and upper mid-range. And we can hear stuff around 1K very easily. So little divergences of that square wavy stuff and that kick drummy stuff around 1K are very easily picked out. And you wouldn't be able to see that on the measurement, but it might go some ways towards explaining why something like that would jump out. And we're moving right along. We're 12 minutes into a 30-minute long thing, so maybe I will skip around or speed it up or something. I'll stretch this a little longer even though there's only 3 people here, because I do need to be doing it and I want to finish it, or at least get a big old head start on it. And this was part of the job, was getting through this stuff. So I see it speeding up. These are all too long, but now I can't say as that sounds nice, but I'm curious as to what's happening here. This is much quicker. I don't know, maybe I can use it. Maybe we're getting into a better zone. It's cutting off the decay properly, but the attack is pretty darn noisy. That's a lot of very high frequency stuff hitting there, and it's all scrambled up, which is kind of a good thing though. Like, we have a bunch of different frequencies imposing themselves all at the same time. And this is all up in the highs, and this is all like, some of these waveforms are how you reconstruct a really, really high frequency tone. This is at 96K. So this attack, this little departure here, this is bright as anything. As are these. Let's look at the individual samples on these. Yep. So we're talking a lot of very bright energy in this attack. Although the actual onset is relatively smooth. It goes into a clip, and this is going to be more mid-rangey, and then goes into a series of waveforms. And then we start getting the really bright stuff a little bit later. Here and here. And then it starts just slowing down and turning into a more normal kick. So all that stuff was like right up in the bright front edge. Electro kick, anyone? Clearly electro kick. So we'll grab that one. It got our attention, and we'll put it sort of towards the end where the metalier and noisier kicks went, but it's not going to be one of your sustainy rumbly ones. It's a punchy, aggressive one. You compare it with these. We're getting a good variety of weird kick noises. So these are all going to be fairly similar. I'm listening for stuff in the attack that might jump out. Well, that's a deeper note anyhow. Okay, now you're getting my attention. Less of that sustainy attack. Now it's starting to sound like a very aggressive natural kick drum. So that's going to be around this area. And we maybe can pick something out of these four. It might all start to be like this going forward. Like, nope. It starts to modulate almost immediately. Quick attack. And then that sort of spread out the attack in a way that I don't like. So we're looking at this area. And this one is maybe brighter than I want. And this is in the range where, and I bet I know why. The Asteroid Mini Synth has a control marked pop. And pop throws high frequency stuff very briefly in there. And so what this is going to be is me turning down that pop control so that it goes from this extremely high bright stuff to very slightly darker, to darker and a little bit quieter, and it started at this. I'm thinking maybe two of these, this one and this one. Because this is in that realm where they're now much quicker, and that's useful. So I'll grab that. We'll start to put these guys up front. And then this was darker and not as super bright. And this has almost got a natural quality to it. Copy that guy. I'm reasonably confident that that's going to be something useful. And what else have we got here? So that's spreading it out more. I don't like that attack as much. Sounds like it's creeping up again though. See, when I talk about attack, what I mean is stuff like this. It's like a clave or something. It's like a note in there. And that's too characteristic. It's like I don't need a little percussive sounding scrapey noise happening in there. So these have that attack spread out too much again. Although you never can, sometimes you get it where an individual hit in the middle of the other ones has broken it up in some interesting way. It's not happening right now. Instead what we're getting is just more of that scrape, like this. There's a very aggressive electro kick. Unfortunately, it is so spread out that it doesn't feel like a kick at all. Why is that? Because the entire attack section is nothing but high frequency noise. This we do not like. This is producing a high frequency honk where there's supposed to be low frequency impact. So it's not getting out of the way. In all the ones that we had like this, where we liked it, this area up here had low frequency stuff mixed in, and that does not, so not that one. These start to sound more like a, oh, what just happened? I think I skipped ahead. Well, I needed to anyhow. Some of these had lows in them. This is kind of a heavy electro kick too, so let's look at this and see how it's different if it is. There's a certain amount of irregularity going on in here, and it rather quickly gives over to, oh yeah, okay, so let's look at this lows versus highs thing. We got a high wave, then a set of lows mostly, and then another one up here, down here again, up here again, down here again. So in the middle of all this really high frequency buzz, it's kind of suggesting a lower wave going up and down. And that's why that sounded like not complete and total garbage to me. Although that's probably more in the mid-range really than anything else. But end result is another electro style kick. That doesn't sound exactly like just a frequency whip. We'll stick this in with the other electro kicks. Let's move these weird ones from the beginning later on. And let's move on with our day. Kind of same as. I have so many things wired into each other for this that it doesn't really move very much. Something interesting about that, it felt like the high frequency stuff was hitting at the same instant as the kick, the lows. Let's investigate that. Might be something in this one. Let's see what it's doing. Same deal. We have a degree of lows mixed in with these very high highs. Like up for these three, down for these two, up, down again. It's scattered. It's doing stuff more strangely. And I think I also see a certain amount of irregularity as it slows down into the lows. So probably that's going to be another acceptable electro style kick. It certainly got that quality about it, and it seems to be coming with the lows nice and quickly. Like the lows should hit you good and fast when it shouldn't just swoop down and then only deliver lows much later. So more in the way of our electro. Currently our onset electro kicks are like this. Is this also? Kind of is, yeah. Move that to be over here. How about this? No, that's not quite the same. That's your metal style. And we have some sustain in here somehow. What's going on with this? Oh. I need to select this. Yeah, something's wiggling in there. What happened just before that kicked in? That's this bright, edgy noise. Maybe that's going to come in useful. This is just before this started to feed back and start to resonate. I'll grab it and see how it sits compared to these other guys. Very similar, but it hangs onto the lows a little bit longer. So past that point. These are all very similar. But I think we're going to start raising the pitch. Yep. Here's one of your classic sort of house music, zoom down in frequency. Now my question is that classic enough, or is that just kind of dull and out of focus? And is this better? Or is this better? Neither of those are really better. Yeah, the bass is starting to hurt my back a little bit. Oh well. It's a definite swoop here. Let's keep skipping ahead. We're dropping down, but at what point do we start losing the aggressive electro-y nature of this? Oh no, I'm all the way at the front again. I was just here. When I want to lose track, I need to hear all of these in succession. Or maybe I do. Anybody counting the ones on the bottom and tell me whether I'm close enough to 26. And here's where we were left off. That's actually not half bad. Kind of bright. I'm going to say not so much, but where did these start changing? I think it's getting into a zone where something different is happening. Those are low frequencies. I can see by how it's not a dark blue. There's more space between the lines. Oh, that's pretty aggressive. But it's not very timely. It's all spread out. Yeah, here the brightness is all up front, and then the lows are following after with a great big delay. Do not like that. Whereas something like this, compared to it's not that different. I'm just not that big of a fan of constantly having this attack on here. I know where it's coming from. It's coming from the Blue Lantern Mini Shimmery that I'm piping into the output, but this might be the time when I'm running it into the just mix output, so we're listening to it directly. And I think I'm getting more mileage out of it sometimes when I'm running it through the FM and frequency modulating the pitch by that effect. So we've got lots of kicks that sound like this. You can kind of see they're all covering this range. Oh, but we're starting to change that a little bit. Hear the difference in the attack? When did that kick in? Why did that sound interesting to me? Because we have this bright little spike at the beginning, immediate lower frequencies, and things that aren't just the vertical walls of the square wave, and a funny spacing between these things that turns into a regular waveform rather abruptly. Speed that up a little bit. If that's so great, what about the one right next to it? How is that different? It doesn't have the lows. This has more lows. You heard that too, yeah? You go to this one. And then this one. The lows in that are making me take it, so we're going to go with this one. I'm going to put it in the middle here somewhere. Surroundings are like this. Bunch of various weirdness. How far have we got? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, W, X, Y, That's 26 right there. Here's the question. Do I have anything in the end of this that I really should have? So let's do a little quick spot checking and see whether this zone from this way on has stuff that I want to include. I'll include that, and then I'll winnow out whichever ones I don't like later. But I kind of got there. This is kind of what I meant to do, was be able to get 26 interesting kicks out of this 30-minute session. These are very characteristic. Like, I've got this bass covered, and I don't need to have any like this. Sounds like a hiccup. We've clearly got some sustaining ones. Oh, I gotta say though, that particular one, first one, is not as interesting as I thought, so never mind. Clearly we're fooling with the FM a little bit more now. I always see the viewers like wane and wax, average watch time 3 minutes, and it's like, yeah, well, this is why this is a job. I'm sharing this with you, but if you find it unbearable, I will do it for you, and then I will give you the kick at the end of the process. You don't have to do this for 3 hours at a stretch, but it's kind of useful if I do. Somebody can do it, and then everybody can enjoy the result. Last one. Oh, interesting. That looks very long and sustained, but it's not. What's going on here? Okay, sir, you've just got my attention. I like the thumpiness of that. It drops down into the extreme lows, but it's kind of drier and cleaner than I really expected it to be. I thought it was going to be a big, long, sustaining honk. That's giving me a really clear impression of where the attack sits, and that's useful. What's it like if I turn it into a mad double kick track? Alrighty, that works real good, doesn't it? Hell yeah. Okay, we may have 26 kicks, but this is now going to be one of them, and we'll lose one of the other ones. Which one? I don't know, but we're keeping that. Sitting there in the middle of these other guys, it's like, it clearly feels like a useful kick. Although, we could move it a little earlier in the rotation. And let's lose this one, because we know that we're getting too many now, so we'll be proactive here. That's a kind of cool sounding one too. Very similar, it's very close. Yep, Adam Clayton, apparently. U2 kick. And what can we replace that's stupid and bad? How about that? Weird chirp. We'll replace that with our new hotness. Getting there, getting there. This is looking up. Then we got a whole bunch of brighter ones. I can kind of spot which ones are lower. Like if they're this dark blue color, that means there's not enough space between the waveforms. Oh, that's weird. We are sustaining the mini shimmery clearly far too long. It sounds like we're hitting a conga or something. Or a hi-hat. Yeah, there we go. There's our hi-hat. So these are not going to be that useful because we're going to be supplying hi-hats by actually using a hi-hat if necessary. I don't feel that much of a use in, although a little snare drum maybe? It's kind of too bassy though. And these are getting much more high pitched and much quicker. Yeah, here's our new kick. We call this stunt kicks. Middle song with a double kick like this. Actually, hang on, that sounds almost real. That was meant to be a joke. Didn't turn out to be as much of a joke as I thought. That's real aggressive, but is it better than any of these? No, because these are bassy, and that is not. Never mind. Oh, and we'll add the hi-hat to it. Okay. Yeah, clearly this area is not going to be useful to me. We're sort of doing weird things here. Very helpful. So yeah, we get to skip over some of this. We're closer to being done than I thought. because like my kick drums here have pieces of metal attached to them. Somewhat unhelpful. And I'm definitely not happy with that attack, so that kind of sucks. Yeah, this whole area not working very well for me. This might be a period of experimentation. Oh God. Okay. That is a very aggressive electronic sounding kick, but not good. And that's just a crazy squelch. Hey, crazy squelch gabber techno. Stop. It's been a long day. Okay, here's a question. When the pitch drops down this much, are any of these usable? That's kind of a click. That's kind of a thud. Nope. Probably not. Maybe not. So, if I was to try to use this, what would I get? Okay, most of that is not remotely useful. It's just a subsonic shove that's not constructive. It's not likely to be better than the ones I've already got. What about that? Sounds like clicking sticks together and a kick at the same time. And this yeah, they're kind of dry, they're not useful. Mind you, I've got all that I need now, so we're just being thorough. Like the length of decay on this hi-hat noise on top of this is what I'm not liking, and so these are not proving useful. Also, we have this big DC offset problem in here. It shouldn't hurt anything, but it's not constructive. Oh, and we're just fixing it. The recording has turned down the sustain on that hi-hatty noise. And then back up, and then down again. I'm feeling that that's not sitting in a range I would like. That's clicky. That sounds almost like a regular kick drum. I like how the high frequencies and bass are hitting at the same time. Let's go and have a look inside this and see why it's doing that. And we can see why it's doing that. So we have high frequencies in these narrow parts. The low frequencies are sitting in the preponderance of the energy down here. They're happening almost instantly, and then they're changing up a little bit. So down here, up just a bit as it starts to vary, and up here and transitioning over to this area. So that'll work. Let's find something to replace with this. Because that's going to work. How about this weird thing? It has that honk I was complaining about earlier on. That one goes bye-bye and is replaced with a nice punchy kick where all the frequencies hit in the right place. Very good. I think we might be slightly over 26. I'm not sure how closely I've been keeping track of this, but all in all, so that has a bit of an electronic-y feel to it. Not different enough, I think. That one definitely has the swoop down thing going on. Is it better than anything here? Yeah, I'd say that's better than one of those two. Better than this one. While being fairly similar in some ways. Those are kind of weird, these guys. Well, let's see what else we have. We're getting closer to the end, thankfully. Long day. These may be too short. That's just silly. Yep, don't want any of these. Not even if they sound like a rim shot. Oh, clearly the thing to do is add a hi-hat to it. This might be the point at which it's like, yeah, I'm about done. getting onto the very last bit of it, and it's like, none of this is working. And I got ready to stop. I'm clearly pushing it in interesting directions, but not usefully. So if we had one that was like this, that sounded just like a super bass kick drum, super damped, just stuffed with pillows, right? Kind of feel bass in there. More than in these. The question is that going to be better than something that acts like that? That acts better than the other one. This stuff is just messy. It's got this sort of chuff to it. And it's not it's one of those honking bass resonances. Instead we'll have a really clicky, kind of low thump in there. Only not really. And so that'll be one of our options for typewriter-like metal drums. Listening through these to hear if any of them feel like there's low frequencies in there. Not so much. So you hear how those, they all sound really synthetic. Whereas this one that we took, arguably a synthetic quality to it, but it also feels like a hyper clicky, nasty metal kick. We'll put it in last. And some of these are just obviously fake as anything. At which point we start to lose focus. Yeah, we're really getting into the end here. So that's unusable. And now we have a kind of feeding back thing going on. That's unusable. Well, we do have a hyper-aggressive zwip here as long as we filter out that other stuff. Yeah, that hits in the low frequencies just well enough that I would call that arguably usable. It just requires filtering. So what's it better than? we'll put it on alongside this. Because it's kind of electro. Or we'll put it in alongside these, because it's kind of electro. And we'll be editing out those like subsonic stuff there, because that's unhelpful. But we might be able to take one of these out. That's so hyped, I'm going to lose that one. Because it's very similar to the other one. And that sounds strangely like an actual kick drum on Mars. I don't remember them voting for anything Anteater Collective. And we have just got through our session. So that was extraordinary. So yeah, anybody who is still here, this is your reward. I see 4 concurrent users, and who knows how many are in chat or not being shown, because it's good at not showing these things properly. Oh, what just happened? I just knocked my stuff around, that's all. Up. You hear that noise? That noise is bad things happening. Not super bad things, but all the same, this is going to cause a problem. Don't mind me shuffling with my various things. There we go. Shutting off the bass. There. Now things are a little quieter. And what we're going to do is save this. I'm going to rename that, I think, but that's what the folder was called. And hello again. So yeah, anybody who is still here, first of all, congratulations, 3 hours of mind-rotting tedium in getting through a half hour of continuous samplage. But I think we got there. I don't think we were too arbitrary in stuff, and we got all of the best kick samples out of that long sampling session. So if anybody is still here and would like to pitch an idea about what plugin you want to get this coming Sunday, I'll give you the choices of clip-only 2, monitoring 2, which will have dark instead of not just another dither, and pressure 5. Thoughts? This man commenting went away after a while, I gotta say. Wow, okay. Anteater Collective, I guess you just earned a prize. You're the only one hanging in here the entire time. And I can do clip only. That's actually kind of cool, because the thing about clip only 2 that also, two of you said clip only. It's going to be clip only. Sorry, Foco. I'll follow up with Pressure 5 later. Pressure 5 also contains what I did in clip only. The thing about clip only 2 that you can have is it's been completely revised to work with high sample rates in a way that no previous clip only has. So this now beats 80 clip, everything else. If you're running at like 96K or whatever, as I like to do, this is the one that works with that most effectively. It will get a better sound that's more like what clip only is supposed to be, and it'll do it at any sample rate. So maybe mastering folks who want to do that kind of thing might find it useful as well. If you're doing some kind of mastering at like 192K and you're looking for something that will give you the 80 clip style sound of the softened attacks, but you're at a wildly escalated sample rate, this will still work. So we'll call it clip only 2. That's a decent building block for what I'm doing going forward. And I'll get back with you next week and we'll see what else we can make. I think I'm going to be getting back into the coding because this was just a side excursion because I've been working on these samples for so long, just overwhelmingly long. And with this, I'm pretty close to finished. I've at least done the selection. I'll narrow it down to exactly 26 and then do the editing and stuff there. And unless you want me to do that now with you, which is not impossible, it's been a long day. That stuff is not especially hard though, so I can leave it as an exercise for a reader. Let's call it that. So I'm going to go and have a bit of a lay down and finish up with these samples. I'm very pleased with having gotten through all of those. And I will be posting the full list of all the samples I'm making available as soon as I've done this, because I've got everything up to this final little point done. And this was the really long sampling session full of like garbage and uselessness. And so it was going to require the heaviest work getting it all to work. And we got there. We got right to the end and made it work. So I'll talk to you folks later. Thanks for joining me on this Monday something stream. And bye-bye for now.